morning, everyone, and welcome to this press conference by Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, MSF, on Sudan. This will be a hybrid event with attendance both here in the room in Nairobi and online. After I will introduce the speakers, each will give a short opening statement, and then we will follow with questions, both from those here in the room and online. There will be time for interviews or follow-up questions after, and the press conference is expected to last approximately 1 hour in total. So with that, I should also introduce myself. I'm Heather Pagano. I'm the International Communications Coordinator for MSF, and I'm happy to moderate this event here today. So our speakers today, we have Dr. Christos Christou, the MSF International President, is joining us online. Christos will be giving an overview of the situation in Sudan, sharing his own reflections from his recent visits to both Chad and Darfur. Abdalla Hussein, MSF's Operations Manager, here in person in Nairobi, who will be giving an overview of the situation in Khartoum and Darfur. And Ms. Helena Cardelach, here in person, who will speak about the situation in Gezira and White Nile states. So with that, over to you, Dr. Christos.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, and please accept my apologies for not being there with you. I just came recently from a visit, as Heather said, in Chad and Sudan, and allow me to share with you a little bit my views. I will start by saying that Sudan is one of the worst crises the world has seen for decades. Over the past year, it has become a colossal man-made catastrophe. There is intense fighting between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, that has led to extreme levels of suffering across the country. Airstrikes, drone strikes, and heavy weapons have destroyed markets, infrastructure, including health facilities and residential neighborhoods. It is estimated at this moment that only 20 to 30% of health facilities remain functional in Sudan, meaning that it is incredibly difficult for people to get treatment when they need it. MSF is one of the very few medical aid groups still operating in Sudan. We work in 10 states, and you'll get all these details, including some of the areas that they have been working. Darfur. And over the past year, we have witnessed some of the worst impacts of the fighting. We have responded to multiple mass casualty events and emergencies. We have performed life-saving surgical procedures, assisted women to give birth, including with emergency cesarean sections. And we have treated children in our pediatric wards and inpatient therapeutic feeding centers. In refugee camps and locations hosting displaced people, we have improved water and sanitation conditions, but we also run mobile clinics and we have vaccinated children. But what we are able to do is in no way adequate to meet the needs of the population. Before the war, there were dozens of humanitarian actors in the country, and now there are almost no one. It is vital that they return despite the challenges, of which there are many, and we will explain and elaborate on a few of them. Let me focus on the access issues, which is one of the key challenges, of course. For the past year, very few visas to bring experienced emergency teams into the country have been issued, and this drastically hindered the scale up of the humanitarian response. On top of this, the Sudanese authorities have been systematically withholding authorizations for medical supplies and staff to be transported into areas controlled by the Rapid Support Forces. This is a deliberate decision to block humanitarian assistance, violating the international humanitarian law and the laws of war, and putting the lives of millions of people at risk. Already 25 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, which is almost a 40% increase compared to the previous year. 18 million are facing acute levels of hunger, and we are seeing catastrophic levels of malnutrition in some of the areas where we work. Over 8.4 million people have fled their homes since April 2023, and the United Nations has estimated that 13,900 people have been killed since the war began, although this is likely an underestimated number. In West Darfur alone, it is estimated that between 10,000 to 15,000 people were deliberately killed in ethnically targeted violence. The needs are growing, but the delivery of humanitarian assistance is being deliberately obstructed. The only airport that is open is in Port Sudan, and the blockade means that land routes from Port Sudan to RSF-controlled areas of Khartoum are not viable. The same goes for the Darfur region, meaning that Darfur is only accessible by crossing the border from Chad. And this is what I did, actually. I recently traveled from Chad to central Darfur. This involved passing through El Janina in West Darfur, where two major massacres took place last year. And that led to the mass exodus of the population. The city at the moment looks like a ghost town. When the war started, the city became so dangerous that for many months, no one could gain access and no one could leave the city. Reports that hundreds of people have been killed and wounded emerged, but attempts to safely evacuate survivors were not successful. An MSF surgical team was put on standby at our hospital in Adre, across the border in Chad, and ready to receive any patients that were evacuated. At the same time, another MSF team was ready to cross into Darfur to reach El Janina. But neither of these options were possible due to the intensity of the fighting. Finally, in June last year, thousands of people began to reach Chad from El Janina. In the space of just 3 days, we received more than 150 war-wounded Sudanese at the hospital we support in Adre. We heard horrific stories of violence, including sexual violence from the survivors. And from their testimonies, it became clear that they had been deliberately targeted by Arab militias because of their ethnic identity. The hospital we support in El Janina was completely looted at the start of the war, and it took many months before it was able to reopen. Having crossed the borders and having left El Janina, I reached Zalenki. I saw villages and camps that have been burned to the ground. People there have lost everything and they are receiving no support. UN agencies and most of their implementing partners suspended or reduced the operations in April last year, and they have not returned. It is in the same in many other parts of Darfur, and the same situation in the rest of Sudan. We are rebuilding and re-equipping this moment part of the Zalenki teaching hospital, but there is so much more to be done that we cannot do it alone. Central Darfur, from what I saw, is truly a black hole when it comes to humanitarian assistance, a humanitarian desert, as others call it. In Chad, more than 500,000 people have taken refuge, and the situation in the camps is devastating to see. In 4 camps, MSF is providing more than 7. This is not activity for MSF. We have to say that loudly, and certainly not something we usually do on such a scale. Yet still people are only receiving 11 liters per day, while the standards of the humanitarian emergency settings is 20 liters per person per day. In one camp, there is just 1 latrine for every 677 people. There is also currently a deadly hepatitis E outbreak spreading in villages and camps near Adre, which is being exacerbated by poor situation, poor living and water conditions, and this desperate shortage of clean water. In conclusion, the crisis in Sudan is widespread and is growing by the day, but the humanitarian response is deeply inadequate. There is no doubt that there are enormous challenges in Sudan, but still they are not insurmountable. It is possible to scale up the humanitarian response, and we know this because we are there. The vast needs, the known atrocities that are being committed, these are all reasons why we urge the United Nations to redouble their efforts to provide assistance to people in Sudan. Patients are dying due to violence-related injuries and preventable illnesses. Children are perishing due to malnutrition. Women are dying because of complications during pregnancy or childbirth. And patients with chronic diseases are dying because they are running out of medication. And this can be prevented. We urge parties to the conflict to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and the humanitarian commitments they signed in Jeddah Declaration in May last year to protect civilians and ensure safe, unhindered humanitarian access to all areas of Sudan, without exception. This needs to include opening all borders, crossings, and lifting the blockade of humanitarian movements across front line to deliver the aid. We urge the United Nations to use their influence and leadership in this crisis to ensure the parties to the conflict fulfill these obligations and to initiate a rapid scale-up of the humanitarian response as a matter of urgency. We also urge donors to increase funding for the humanitarian response in Sudan. Without these three vital commitments, a humanitarian response on the scale that is required to prevent this colossal crisis from deteriorating any further will not be possible. And we are extremely worried of the situation. That's why we called this press conference today. And I really want to thank you again. I will pass the floor back to the room, and we are here for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christos, for painting that picture of this critical humanitarian emergency. We heard about 98% of your intervention, just a few moments dropped out, but please be aware we will be sharing a version of his statement for all of you to have after the conference. Thank you very much again. Over to you, Abdalla.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I will be trying to complete what Christos has shared. I'll focus on the North Darfur region, and then later on zoom out to Khartoum. In the North Darfur region, MSF was operating before the current violence. We were running a maternity hospital, which in the beginning of the war, we transformed it into a surgical facility where we were treating war wounded. We had also a program in a camp called Zamzam, which is outside Al-Fashir town, where 120,000 people were living before the war. Today, that camp is around 300,000 people. There's a continuous influx of people coming from different parts of Darfur. MSF has maintained a presence in that region and other regions of Darfur. Okay, I will go back again to say that I will speak about Darfur and Khartoum, but I will start with North Darfur, where MSF was operating before the current violence. We had a maternity hospital in Al-Bashir before the conflict, and this hospital was transformed at the beginning of the war into a surgical facility. We were treating in the first months war wounded, as well as the civilians were looking for care. We were also working in a camp called Zamzam, which is in the south of Al-Fashir town, where 120,000 people were living before the war. Currently, the population has grown to 300,000 people. That's our estimation of the camp. People are coming from different parts of Darfur. I would like to talk about the malnutrition situation and share with you figures of an assessment that we did in the beginning of January. We found a catastrophic malnutrition figures that 25% of children under 5 years were malnourished, and 7% were severely acute malnourished, which is really catastrophic numbers. Normally, in a still crisis situation, we expect like 15%, less than 15% of the children to be malnourished, and here we have more than double. We also found that especially children under 2 years, 40% of them were also acute and malnourished. We also found a woman of pregnant women and women who are breastfeeding had 40% of them malnourished as well, which is quite unusual figures for adult population. The causes of this were mainly, of course, the food was cut off when most of the humanitarian organizations left North Darfur in the month of April 2023. The last time that food distribution was done in this camp was the month of May in 2023. So people were deprived of food supplies. Of course, the majority of the population that live in North Darfur were dependent on humanitarian aid. And today, as Christos was saying, we're one of the very few organizations. In fact, in the town of Al Fashir, there's only 2 NGOs that are physically present. The humanitarian organizations left and never came back to the scale they had before. The population in this area has other needs, needs of health needs. There are only 2 hospitals in the town of Al Fashir that are operating, run by MSF, and we are overstretched. The pediatric hospital that we are running there is overcrowded. We are trying now to scale up after the assessment in Zemzem camp to set up a 50-bed hospital in that camp to cope with the situation. But it's not adequate. We cannot cover alone the needs in this area. There is a need for a scale up from humanitarian organizations, from international community. Maybe now to move to Khartoum. Khartoum, we have also hospitals that MSF is supporting. We were focused in the beginning to cover all the needs as much as possible, but of course we were overwhelmed by the war casualties. Today, since the month of September last year, we had difficulties to supply the hospitals we have in Khartoum because there is a deliberate obstruction of necessary supplies. There is a difficulty to deploy as well qualified health personnel that we are trying to send, but we are unable to send because there is an inhumane policy of filtering the type of supplies that you can send. They are not supplies that can meet with the needs of the population. For example, to give you the hospital of a Turkish hospital where we support, we were unable to get the supplies to do the C-section, which is the how do you call a cesarean section for women, to this hospital because the supplies that we want to send are filtered. Boxes are opened to check which kind of type of medicine we're taking, and if they are intended for war casualty, they are removed, which comes at the expense of treating civilians. And the majority of the people that we receive in that hospital are women and children. So it's we have also catastrophic situation there. Today, the supplies of that hospital, 25% of the items that we need to treat patients are not there. Our surgical facility, surgical activity is almost to stop because we are not able to get the necessary supplies. Those are the picture more or less of Khartoum. Population are not able to also reach the facilities because most of the health facilities in this city are shut down. So people have to go to different facilities before they come to the facility supported by MSF, which comes with, I just described it to you, without supplies, without the health personnel. The solution to this is what Christos has just mentioned. We need access. We need access for humanitarian personnel. We need access for medical supplies at a scale that meets the needs in the different parts of Sudan. We need a simplified visa and permit process that does not overburden humanitarian activities. We need an open borders. The borders on the across Sudan. We need the ability to cross lines of front lines of different conflict parts of the conflict of Sudan. Today, our teams are trying as much as possible to cope with the needs, but we are overwhelmed in all different areas of that we are operating in the country, and there is a need for a humanitarian community and the donors to give more attention to the conflict in Sudan. There is a systematic neglect. We don't see the level of attention that this conflict requires over the last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdalla. Now, please, over to you, Helena.
Thank you very much. After what Abdalla was sharing with us, I would like also to share with you our concerns regarding other parts of Sudan that are more accessible and are more safe as White Nile State. Before the war, White Nile State had about 300,000 South Sudanese refugees in the southern parts of the state. When the war erupted, there was a massive movement of population, people fleeing from Khartoum, settling in those camps, and many others continuing their way towards South Sudan. MSF started supporting some of the camps since June 2023. As you can imagine, the overcrowding conditions with a lot of people arriving, thousands of people arriving, and the precariousness of the living conditions led to a spike of diseases in those camps, and there was a measles outbreak. This measles outbreak was combined with malnutrition levels, and right after we saw an increase of mortality in the camps, in the health facilities that we were supporting. That's how we started supporting the Ministry of Health, and we conducted a mass vaccination campaign. Thanks to that mass vaccination campaign, we could control the outbreak and we could reduce the mortality rates in the camps, in the southern camps of White Nile State. But the situation is still very complicated and very dire for the population living there. Water is not enough, it's far from being enough in the camps. Sanitation conditions are very, extremely poor, I would say. And at any moment, another outbreak such as cholera can happen in those areas. The same situation we are seeing when witnessing in other places in Sudan, other safer areas, as I was mentioning before, like Kassala. Kassala had close to 190,000 IDPs in February. Among them, 40,000 people arrived after Wat Madani was attacked in December 2023. MSF launched a 10 weeks intervention for the IDPs, for the displaced people arriving in the area, but the needs are still very big. The same situation in White Nile. There's not enough food for all the families. There's not enough running water in the gathering sites. And the overcrowding and poor conditions in the camps, again, can lead to other outbreaks and spread of diseases in the area. On top of that, there's lack of healthcare, lack of medicines and supplies. So MSF is asking again for the scale up of the humanitarian response and other organizations to respond and to the acute needs that we are seeing today in those areas. And then I would like to finish my intervention talking about what we are witnessing as well in Wat Madani in Gezira State. As I was mentioning before, Wat Madani was taken by the Rapid Support Forces in mid-December last year in 2023. Because of this advance and the conflict, it is estimated that about 500,000 people fled Wat Madani and Gezira State. But there's hundreds of thousands of people still living in the area, okay? Even if we lack of a lot of information, we are witnessing on a daily basis how the conflict is impacting civilians. We're talking about airstrikes, we're talking about shellings, we're talking about all types of violences that are injuring and even killing civilians today in the area. As we speak now, there are 3 active front lines in the outskirts of Wat Madani. I would say that Gezira State and Khartoum states are the hotspots or the epicenters of the war today in Sudan. But civilians are also being impacted by the situation of lawlessness that is growing since the conflict started. They are being victims of attacks, of aggressions, of lootings, and very little is being done to stop the situation. In mid-January, MSF could have access to Wat Madani to support the Wat Madani Teaching Hospital. But since then, we haven't had access again. The government of Sudan is also preventing the shipment of supplies in the area. Khartoum has been suffering from this situation for more than 6 months now. as my colleague Abdalla was mentioning. And Gezira State is suffering from the same situation. And this is putting a huge burden on the population, a population that is already extremely vulnerable, not only because they are being victims of the conflict, but because they are also being victims of the side effects of it. All the economic activity has been disrupted. There's shortages of foods, of goods in the market. There's not enough, there's power cuts as well. There's not enough water for all the population still living and got there in those areas. And key civilian infrastructures have also been partially damaged. We're talking about shops, we're talking about markets, we're talking about residential areas. MSF is supporting the Wat Madani Teaching Hospital with life-saving services focused in the operations theater, in the emergency room, in the maternity, and the pediatric wards. To give you some numbers, we are receiving an average of 200 patients being victims of all types of violence per month. We are consulting more than 700 women in the maternity, and we're performing more than 18 C-sections per week. But more has to be done, and the challenges are enormous. As I was saying, the scarcity of goods in the market means that we are lacking as well of fuel. And sometimes because there's power cuts, we don't have enough fuel to run the generators of the hospital. And in some occasions, we have had to perform some surgeries with torches. But another challenge that we are facing in Wat Madani today is the lack of access. There's no transports in town. There's no ambulances, there's no referral system, there's no transports, and patients are arriving by bicycle, if they have one, by foot or by donkey carts. Checkpoints are also preventing and delaying the arrival of patients to the health facility. But we are not just seeing the direct victims of the conflicts in the hospital, we are also receiving patients in very critical conditions because of lack of treatments, lack of medication, and lack of follow-up. 3 days ago, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues, a medical doctor who is working now in Wat Madani Teaching Hospital, and he was explaining to me that the day before he just saw a 45-year-old man arriving in the yard who just fainted and fell down on the floor. He was suffering from a chronic cardiac disease, and he had to walk for more than 1 hour to reach the hospital, and he passed away. Also, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had, I think it was 3 weeks ago, we had a mother in the maternity giving birth. It was an emergency, also arriving in the yard. And also she passed away because she was suffering from complications that could have been prevented with proper follow-up, with proper checkups. But yes, I mean, today, Wat Madani Teaching Hospital is the only facility fully running, I would say, in Wat Madani and the whole Gezira state. There's other facilities, but they lack of supplies, they lack of medication, and they lack of health workers to cope with the huge needs. The collapse of the health system, the non-existence of other organizations, and the systematic blockage is causing that we don't have enough information to know the impact that the war is having on the population today. We are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Gezira State, as it is Khartoum, as it was shared by my colleague, are humanitarian deserts. If we are not able to bring supplies, to bring medication, to bring humanitarian workers, the consequences will be catastrophic for a population that is subjected already to unspeakable, I would say, levels of suffering. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helena, and thank you to all of our speakers for these excellent interventions. So now we can open up to questions. We'll take a few here in the room. Please raise your hand and say your name and the media outlet from which you are reporting. Online, please, in the chat box, say your name and media outlet, and I will call on you to ask your questions. Let's start with here in the room. Please.
Thank you. My name is Ansoy from the BBC, and one is a clarification when Abdalla was talking about the nutrition assessment. You did talk about the statistics that you found and you compared it to what you usually have. I did not understand the 50%. If you could clarify that, please. And I just wanted to ask a question about the medical supplies, where you have said that there's a deliberate blockage of medical supplies. The boxes are opened. Give us a sense of what supplies are not allowed in and what happens then to those supplies.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the room before we turn over to Abdalla? Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is War. I'm from Ready to Message. My question is to seek clarification on the number of people killed in West Darfur, because the figure always differs from one organization to another. And also the other question is about the obstruction in Darfur. Which party of the conflict is really obstructing access? Is it the army or RSF more, especially in the Darfur region? The third question is about the security of the humanitarians in Darfur. How is the security of the humanitarians, especially MSF, in doing their work, whether in North Darfur or West Darfur? And how many hospitals you have closed or shut down because of the conflict? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. So Abdalla, over to you for the clarification on the malnutrition numbers, and maybe you can share with us a bit on the medical supplies and the question on obstruction of access, and we can come to the other points thereafter.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. For the malnutrition, basically in a crisis, we have indicators that are still not good, but that we consider at least that they are stable. And the numbers that we found, the 25% of malnutrition for children under 5 that I shared, is a level of what we would consider as a stable situation. It's important to say that the children under 2 years is actually, I don't know actually where to use to describe it, because 40% of children of 2 years, under 2 years old, is enormously catastrophic. So this is that's what we found. Just to add that we did a screening just to verify the numbers that we found in January. We did a screening in March of 100,000 children and women in the same camp, and the numbers that we found in January are confirmed again. We also found a death number of 2.5 deaths per person per 10,000 per day in the camp, which is also enormous and above the emergency threshold. 2.5 deaths per 10,000 per day. That's what we found in January. It was part of the assessment. So basically, the malnutrition situation is really very bad, and you can expect pretty much a similar situation in other parts of Darfur. This is only the area that MSF had done an assessment. So that's for the malnutrition. The other question was...
The other question was around obstruction in Darfur specifically, I believe.
Yeah. So the question of the obstruction, of course, the permits and the visas are given by the authorities in Port Sudan. And those are where the obstruction we're facing for supplies, we are facing for people is coming from. It's obstruction for crossing lines to areas controlled by RSF, which creates difficulties for our staff or supplies to get in. It's also through the moving around within areas controlled by RSF. The question of the opening of the supplies, of course, the supplies we bring is according to the needs. And of course, we run surgical facilities, some of them for civilian, or most of them for non-combatants and civilians. And these are for women, like doing cesarean section. It can be also for war wounded. And when we bring these kind of supplies across the lines, which means the front lines, they are opened, they're checked. And if they have any purpose of surgical intervention, they are filtered, which puts us in a very difficult situation of not even being able to run a cesarean section in areas like Khartoum, which my colleague was just discussing.
Thank you very much, Abdalla. I think it's also important to note that also wounded fighters also deserve access to care under international humanitarian law, not just women with C-sections, which are also obviously incredibly important. Just on the question when it comes to data and the number of people killed, it's a very difficult one, and as for each organization to say, because we can only speak to what it is that we see. So I think it's probably difficult for us to give the overview of the number of people killed in Darfur. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, either of you.
No, I think there's, of course, there are numbers that the United Nations estimates, like 13,900, but this is, there's no way to verify the number of people that were killed in Sudan during the last 1 year. Of course, there are figures, the assessments that MSF did in chat that President Christos was discussing, that we have estimations, but I think it's really difficult to pinpoint that.
And finally, Abdalla, just on the security of humanitarian workers in Darfur, how do you see that there?
The security, of course, we are negotiating with the different parts to the conflict all the time, but we face harassments. The health workers face harassment. They face harassment from the militias on the checkpoints, in the health facilities, especially when there are incidents of mass casualty, that we find people that are quite nervous and do aggressions to health workers. So I would say that there is humanitarian workers are not the exemption to the violence against the civilian population in Sudan.
Thank you very much. I don't see questions online as yet. Are there others in the room for now? Maybe for the moment, I will hand over to Christos if there's anything you'd like to add.
Well, thanks for the questions, and hope they are quickly addressed. But indeed, by just visiting the different places, as I did very briefly those days in Darfur, you can imagine the level of the atrocities. And of course, by listening to our patients, the people that they fled from the violence and their horrific stories, you can figure out what has been happening for many, many months now. And it was under the radar. That is why it is important even today that we do, all of us, our best to raise awareness of the situation. We tried to few messages to come across, and we will be repeating them all the time. It's a lot about access, about respecting the IHL. All the warring parties, they need to ensure that we can reach all these people that they need us. And there is also a kind of, if I can say something positive that I received from my trip there that I would like also to share with you. When I was in Zelenghi and visiting the different camps there, I was shocked to see that in a few of them, out of the 90,000 people initially being in the camp, now you can barely see 3,000-4,000 people. The rest were either killed or fled. And from all the ruins and the rubbles there, you could see few families coming out and asking for the very obvious, the very, very basic thing, asking for water. Asking for water, asking for food, asking for dignity. And while you see that, at the same time, I visited one of the health facilities that was completely looted. It was really burnt down to the ground. It was, I heard stories about how they took everything from the material, the equipment from the different health facilities. And while I was there, in the backyard, there was a nurse that was coming to meet us. And she came closer. She showed to us a few bricks there and said that now I'm starting with my community to rebuild the place. And what we need is also you and others like you to come and help us. Don't worry, we're going to build it again. We're going to be here. We're going to resource it, but we need you. And I promised to her that I will make everything for this message to come across the whole world, because in all these places, with all these challenges, it is still possible to respond with our humanitarian presence and with our humanitarian aid.
Thank you, Christos. We have one question that came in here online from NPR, Kate Bartlett, who asks if MSF has seen signs of Russian and Ukrainian forces operating in Sudan and how that might add to the challenges faced there. It's a difficult question for us to answer. I think it's we don't ask where the soldiers are coming from when we are on the ground. We say who we are, why we're there, and we ask them to leave us to do our work. But I don't know if there's anything you would like to add to that.
No, I think Heather, you already addressed it. Too. We don't follow the military activities. For us, we're focused on humanitarian situation and the suffering of the people on the ground.
But maybe, Christos, one quick question for you on Eastern Chad. One of the parts that's, I think, cut out was around the provision of water in one area where MSF is providing up to 70% of the water needs, which is very unusual. We're known for medical care, not for water provision. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, indeed. I mentioned, and it was something that I was also surprised when I heard that we are the main actors in providing water in most of the places, not only in Adre, which is a transit place, is not an official camp. People come and then they are relocated in several other places in the region. I've been to Almeche, for example, a place where they have more than 100,000 people at the moment, huge camps. You would expect other organizations to be there with all their expertise and their resources to provide the water. However, I saw MSF providing 70, 80, 85% of the water to this population. And of course, we will keep doing our best to address the needs, but we would like to be able to hand over these things to others. So we focus more on the medical needs of the people, which is also huge. And this is another message that I hope you all understand, that these people are begging for the very basic things here. And the international community should be able to provide them, especially in East Chad, as Heather mentioned, there are no challenges with access. Chad, although a very poor country, having already declared a food insecurity, they are still so generously opening their arms, welcoming all these people. And we know that this cannot carry on forever unless we also, as international humanitarian community, respond there more sufficiently. And unfortunately, this does not happen at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Christos. Other questions in the room? Yes, please. Is there a microphone? I don't know if they can hear you then online, but I can repeat it. Go ahead, please. Excellent question. Thank you. Maybe so the question was from Radio France. Thank you very much. There will be an international conference next week on April 15th, the 1-year anniversary of the war in Paris. And the question is, what will MSF's presence be at this conference, or what messages would we have to pass for it? Dr. Christos, I think that can be for you.
Yes, thank you. We did also some preparatory work for this. We called in another meeting a month ago, before my visit to Chad and Sudan, different donor countries together with the heads of the other United Nations agencies to sensitize, mobilize, and it was clear that we are here not to ask for any fundraising, any support to the other organizations. Of course, with MSF, thanks to the 7 million individuals that they support us, we don't have funding problems. But all other UN agencies and humanitarian organizations, they do. The idea of that event and what we want now from the ministerial event in Paris is to find solutions. And all these countries there, of course, they need to support the different humanitarian organizations to do their work, but they need also to put some pressure, as both my colleagues said before,
Sorry, Christos, I
ask
think
them.
we've lost your audio. Are you mute? Say again.
No, no.
Oh, no, you're
Can you
back. Go
hear me
ahead.
now?
Yes, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
So in a nutshell, what we asked and what we will ask also in this event is solutions. Solutions that have to do with first and foremost ensuring respect to the IHL and access. We want unhindered humanitarian aid to go everywhere inside Sudan. And we also ask from all countries, and especially those with the huge influence, to do their best for this solution and the respect of the IHL by both the warring parties. We would also like to see donor countries supporting different organizations and funding them in order to come and be there present and responding to the needs. At least the UN agencies, but not only.
Thank you, Christos. Another follow-up question from NPR Online. This is in terms of sexual violence. I think that can be for Abdalla and Helena, if you're able to answer. There was mention of women or people being targeted along racial lines in terms of the violence that we've seen. Can we say more about perpetrators is the question, and what kinds of injuries we're seeing in the survivors, if there are unwanted pregnancies, and if young girls are affected, and how does sexual violence compare now compared to the war 20 years ago? So I think if we can answer a bit, the perpetrators are always a difficult one for us to answer. I mean, we depend on what our patients tell us. So I will hand over to Anna. You'd like to answer? Thank you.
Of course, we are running sexual and reproductive health programs, and part of these programs is treating survivors of sexual violence. We are receiving survivors of sexual violence, but we know that these numbers are being unreported by stigma, cultural issues. So for us, it's very difficult to have a clear picture and to know how many cases are happening today in Sudan. And since Sudan is a big country, we cannot say, we cannot have a clear picture of it, but of course it is unreported and it's part of our programs.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that, or?
No, but I wanted to say that the violence that we for Al Janina, I think is
Yes, that was what we read.
yeah, the violence was sexual violence was part of the violence that the refugees we saw in Chad, we interviewed in Chad were reporting. But of course, if the numbers we will see later if confident.
Indeed. And so sexual violence was a part of the horrific violence that was perpetrated against the population there. For more details on that, we can share with you, Kate, after the conference as well. Are there other questions from the room? Please. The microphone's coming. 1 second. There you are.
Hello, I'm Kifaya Ahmed, Radio Tamazuj. My question to Helena, what is the last update and statistic about the child that's suffering or facing malnutrition in Blue Niles? And if you have last updated what it about with Abdalla, what is the, if the MSF is still supporting the humanitarian support in Zamzam camps, and what is the last update of the people or the refugee inside the camp of Zamzams, and how you can achieve your supported during the time that the Al-Fashir divided from the three-parted RSF and SAF and Armed Forest.
Thank you very much for the questions. So the first on Blue Nile, if you don't have the data off the top of your head, we can see with our teams there. Yeah, so maybe we can grab that information for you after. Please see with our press team and we will we'll follow up on that. But maybe Abdalla, then the questions on Zamzam and Al-Fashir.
So for Zamzam, what we have done is that we're scaling up our work there. We had a clinic in the past there for the 120,000. We were counting on other organizations to work with us, which didn't happen since April when everyone evacuated. We continue to run this clinic. But after the assessment now and the figures that I share with you, we're opening a hospital. In the beginning, 50 beds, but eventually 100 beds hospital. We'll also open other health services in the same camp. So basically, we're trying on our best to deploy people and supplies and increase the capacity hospitalization capacity, but it's not enough, and we need more aid to reach this area, not only North Darfur, but South Darfur, Central Darfur, West Darfur that where we were discussing. In terms of the town of Al Fashir, the town is divided into two, so that the town itself is controlled by SAF, or the army of Sudan, and the outskirts you have RSF, and there are other groups also that are present in the town. So we negotiate with all these groups to get in supplies, to get in people. But it's important to mention that we face enormous challenges of getting permits, which is one of the problems we mentioned for Gezira and Khartoum. It is becoming really difficult also for Darfur, and it needs to be simplified. As we said, we need guarantees of getting permits and crossing the border from Tina, which is the Chadian border, which we have been using so far, but it is becoming complicated recently.
Thank you very much. And then you wanted to add?
I just wanted to mention that Blue Nile data, I don't have it now, but later we can share with you, because we're running a nutritional program there. If you were referring to White Nile, after the measles outbreak that was combined with malnutrition rates, it decreased a lot after the vaccination campaign, and because we are running nutritional programs as well in White Nile state in the facilities that MSF is supporting, but I will share with you that data later on if you want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will now take any final questions before wrapping up. Any left in the room? Any online? I don't see any online. Great. Well, thank you very much to our speakers. We appreciate your time, and thank you all of you for your time in joining us here today and online. We really appreciate you giving the spotlight to the situation in Sudan, which is really chronically underreported and a huge catastrophe as shared here today. For anything further, please see with our press team. You have Mildred here. She can raise her hand. For any questions on data, our operations, et cetera, we'd be very happy to help you. And for any other interviews, one-on-ones with the speakers. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.